you know what? Oh, hang on a second. Got that. Well, part of what we're having here in this meeting is that this comes after the Socialist Workers' Party's annual conference with elected branch delegates that we elected in the end of last year. Delegates gathered at the weekend. I mean, I thought it was an excellent and very successful conference. I'm sure comrades will say what they think, who were delegates or observers at it. The conference is our sovereign body. It meets annually. It elects the leadership, the Central Committee, of which I'm one of the newly re-elected Central Committee. But most importantly, it discussed, debated, and agreed a political assessment of the current period and a number of priorities for Socialist Workers' Party branches and our interventions into the outside world. And, you know, one of the central purposes of this meeting tonight is to report on the conference to comrades. And I think for all of us, and for every comrade in the party, people who were there, people who weren't there, to clarify in all of our minds what those issues were that were debated and agreed at conference, and to discuss how we implement them as an organisation, because we always want to combine ideas, theory, and practice to try and shape the world. I think the central theme that came out of conference, there were 6 main sessions and a number of other issues and processes and so on. So I'm not attempting to just, you know, cover it all. What I want to emphasize is what I think was really the central message that came across, and I think came across very strongly on Saturday, but both with what Amy Leather kicked off with, the Joint National Secretary, in the session on the opportunities for the SWP to grow, but I think reflected in the conference itself, when we saw a whole raft of new members and branches talking about how they had grown and how they have new members, that the SWP has to make a shift. And if it does so, it can grow and attract a new layer of people to the SWP and to revolutionary socialist politics in Britain. And fundamentally, that's because of an altered political landscape, things that are happening in British society and the world around us globally. But, you know, the crisis of capitalism and it's has deepened. There is a radicalization, especially amongst young people, not exclusively, but I think especially concentrated in response to the horrors of the system. And the third thing is that the Labour Party, in the wake of the end of Corbynism, and Jeremy Corbyn has not been a Labour MP now for well over a year, the Labour Party is not the natural conclusion of that radicalism. There's a new space, a new terrain. Just to flesh that out, I mean, the crises we're seeing are not, they're multifaceted. There's a whole number of intertwined crises, most obviously the climate crisis, the gathering sense of catastrophe, and more manifestations from you know, that we see around the world, from floods to forest fires and so on. This is a widespread consciousness of this, and we saw the inability of the main capitalist powers to address this with the failure of the COP talks. That poses big questions and can further deepen the radicalization of people who understand we need systematic change if we're going to deal with climate change and save humanity, and it's on that scale. The pandemic, of course, the Omicron variant is a sharp reminder that what, I mean, I was thinking, I penciled in vaccine nationalism, but it's really vaccine imperialism, that you know, that it's just the populations of some of the richest countries who get the vaccine, but huge swathes of the world, especially the poorer parts of the world, are barely vaccinated, in some cases, if at all, which is a giant laboratory for variations and so on that then rebound back into the you know, the richer countries and so on. That's what we're seeing. So, you know, not only are we not out of the woods, and all those questions about, you know, the attempt by the Tories, we need to live with still quite shockingly high levels of deaths, and very worrying levels of deaths yesterday. questions of fighting over safety in workplaces and society, and all of those have returned. One more point, though, I think that the conference did underline as well, is that, in many ways, the way that the Tories, but actually the world's ruling classes, have dealt with the pandemic is a harbinger in many ways of how they will deal with catastrophic climate change, which is to dream about technological fixes and to rely on increasingly top-down, or in some cases, simply authoritarian measures and so on. And I think it's a warning that any idea that our rulers will see the light and will be able to deal with climate change in an effective, humane way, forget about it. We are going to have the fight of our lives. The third crisis is a kind of gathering one, but the economy. Here in Britain, what we've seen from the kind of, increasing is, on the one hand, a level of inflation, price rises. I don't think we've seen. I don't remember inflation and price rises, or just my weekly shopping bill, rising as fast as it had, 20, 30 years. And we know that's going to accelerate through acts of government, the national insurance hike in April, the removal of the energy price cap, and the way the market has just been allowed to run rampant over energy supplies is like to see a punishing level of, and push more and more people to fuel poverty. And in other words, we kind of see probably the biggest, sharpest, concentrated shock to the cost of living, to working class living standards we've seen for perhaps a generation. That's combining, interestingly, with shortages of labour in some key sectors of the economy. Most obviously, everyone knows, heavy goods vehicle drivers, whether they drive the bin lorries in your local area, to people who drive buses, to people who drive trucks that supply key goods in what's usually called logistics and so on. There are big shortages. I noticed that The Guardian ran today an article about how Pret-a-Manger, the cafe and sandwich chain, has had to increase wages twice in the last 4 months, not out of the goodness of its own heart, but because it's struggling to find enough workers. And that's giving at least some groups of workers, especially heavy goods vehicle drivers, a bit more confidence to fight. And there is a little bit of a whiff. There is certainly the potential, certainly the need, the necessity for struggle, and we're not seeing it in anything like the scale. But there are some interesting developments. We've certainly seen, and I think it's combined with the new leadership of Sharon Graham, a little uptick, a kind of doubling in the number of strikes by Unite members, from Coventry Bins to Sheerness Docks and Wincanton B&Q workers and so on. There's more and more of these strikes. There's a ballot now going to take place. It's an internal survey at this point in the National Education Union over pay, the PCS Civil Servants Union. It's going to be a battle with the thresholds, but still there's a pressure to talk about how we're going to fight. We'll probably see another and bigger round of strikes in the universities, probably in early February, taking place. The tube workers on the London Underground, 10,000 of them, have just voted successfully, beating the Tory threshold to strike on London Underground. There is a very strong potential for a ballot on Network Rail, where 9,000 jobs are due to go. There is a potential for struggle. Interestingly, Charlie Kimber, who is the editor of Socialist Worker, was saying to me yesterday that he feels that this week's Socialist Worker on pages 18, 19, if you have a physical copy, where we have reports about struggles and campaigns and strikes, he said he thought it was the best 2 pages on this for months, possibly years, partly because we've got a whole group of comrades reporting from picket lines and the strikes they've been going down to and talking to workers. You may have seen that brilliant little video that Karen Reisman did of the Oldham bus workers who are on strike, but also because there are more picket lines and not just one-day strikes and lots of people. There's a bit of a little whiff, without overstating it, in the air, and we want to build on that. Secondly, as Wendy was mentioning, COVID and the economy particularly are coming together to feed a crisis for the Tory government and Johnson's prime ministership. They're in deep trouble. This is a very sharp shift. Almost the first 2 years of Johnson's period in office, he seemed to be able to sort of ride high and get away with things that you should never have got away with. That suddenly has changed in the last few months and is accelerating. I mean, I think the Christmas parties, the drinks in Number 10's gardens, with now Johnson admitting that he attended the one in May, all of this happening whilst people were dying, families were unable to visit dying relatives, people were being fined. Quite a lot of people were being fined for breaking rules, or allegedly breaking rules, but rules crucially that the Tories had imposed on the rest of us, but decided didn't apply to them. And you know, actually, and maybe we should talk about this a little bit, but you know, wherever possible, we're encouraging people to initiate and take part in protests calling for Johnson to go. We're looking at trying to call something out outside Downing Street, sort of almost as we speak. We've been talking to people tonight about this. You know, there has to be a response, and there's been a bit of hasn't been a response from the leadership of the Labour movement, of the Labour Party, and so on. We have to respond. And I think, as Lendi said, you know, Johnson has gone from being an asset to the Tories, so thought he could get them elected, to being a liability, and they don't want to be dragged down by him. And you know, Tory MPs, once they turn against you, tend to be pretty ruthless, and will probably cut him loose sooner than later. Our point is not just to stand as spectators, but to try and act on this. And the problem is there's been a big vacuum. I mean, Starmer managed finally, a little bit of boldness from Starmer comparatively, but you know, very late to suddenly call for Johnson to resign. But really, and this is back to this big theme of what's taking place, the Labour Party, without Jeremy Corbyn at its head, is simply not the focus for people who want to see radical change, and particularly for people who are, you know, young people who are radicalising, who are questioning the world, what's happening with climate, what's happening with COVID, the inequalities of society, etc., etc. You know, for 5 years, to 2015 to 2019, the answer to that was join the Labour Party and get Jeremy elected. That is not the answer to that. Simon does not inspire people in that way, and therefore there is a vacuum. And all of this is entwined by the fact that we are seeing, last year, it goes back further, but you know, last year we saw a revival of movements on the streets over the last couple of years. You know, think about the huge protests in over Palestine, think about the revolt over sexism with the case of Sarah Everard, how that then became entwined with questions of institutional sexism of the police and the way that they handled those protests, whilst, you know, Boris and his mates were partying in the gardens of Downing Street. The incredible Black Lives Matter movement we saw in 2020, which, you know, the movement may not be as visible on the streets at the moment, but its impact in society is still being felt. I mean, I'm sure we were all celebrating when we saw that result for the Colston Four, who brought down that statue in Bristol. The fact that a jury said actually it was a crime to have this statue, that they didn't deny it. They said, yeah, we brought it down and we were right to. And the jury agreed. That reflected that huge shift in public opinion, much to the Tories' chagrin, I think. I just want to emphasize something here that is important. Again, a theme we talked about at our conference at the weekend. The ideas are contested. You know, it's not true that everybody just agrees with what revolutionary socialists have. I mean, take questions of racism. Is it to be understood and fought through the framework of privilege theory, which tends to see all white people as, you know, complicit in racism and so on, or through the kind of framework of analysis of Marxism, which is seen as rooted in capitalism that divides black and white workers, but in which white workers crucially have an interest to join with black workers to fight racism. These are sharp debates. There's lots of examples. I'll just give one more. There is a revival amongst some people, including some young people, most remarkably, of ideas of Stalinism, of nostalgia for the old Soviet Union, even for old, you know, the butcher of the Russian Revolution, Stalin himself. If you want to know a bit more, read the very good article by Thomas Tengley Evans in the new ISJ. We have to engage in all of these debates, but crucially, all of these developments combined are creating an opportunity to underline it's not automatic, but nonetheless an opportunity for us to attract people towards the Socialist Workers' Party and to grow as an organisation. And where we engage with people and with their ideas and discuss with them and argue with them and put down a poll saying we need to see resistance and we need to explain a world in crisis and fight to change it, we can win people. One sort of pointer to that is that in 2021, so that's last year, 550 people joined the SWP, which is the highest for a number of years, despite some of the limitations of Zoom and so on. 60% were under 35, and half of those were students. And the majority joined at a physical in-person meeting. And I think the conclusion of that, and this again was, I think, something that we really brought home at the conference, was that working around campuses, university campuses, is a key priority for the SWP. Talking to students, finding students who are interested in radical ideas, and inviting them and organising meetings. It is possible with big ideas where we reflect the anger and questioning of a kind of rotten society. We can attract people towards us, and I know that in Norwich we've made a serious and important start on this in the last term, and we want to build on this, and we want to have every SWP branch doing this and so on. And 95% of building the SWP is about the politics, but the technique, the organisational question is important if we're going to translate even brilliant ideas and arguments into reality. And it's important that alongside student meetings, we also want to be integrating students into the local SWP branches, indeed all new members into those branches. And that's why, COVID allowing, and in a sensible way, we are encouraging branches to have at least one physical meeting a month. It's possible to combine that with being on Zoom, so it's a hybrid. But we want a physical meet because we think that is the most effective for attracting new people. And it gives a depth to discussions and relationships when you can actually meet people and so on. And this is what's been working. It would be a mistake, I think, to have a student meeting, which should also be physical, with the branch physical meeting on the same week. We need to coordinate. We need to coordinate them and not clash if we're going to build both successfully. And also, I think that one of the things we want to encourage comrades in Norwich and Lowestoft and elsewhere is that, use the national events. We have national events for young people and new members, like the Socialism 101 courses, and there'll be a physical one in London at some point in the not too far future. Like the educational programme, we've been running one about anti-imperialism, for example. There is going to be, exciting news, a socialist weekender for students and young workers around the SWP in the Lake District in the Youth Hostel late February to provide a space for new comrades or people more recently joined the organisation to develop their ideas, to meet each other and so on. And there'll be other initiatives. The key thing is, and I think this applies to all of us, joining a revolutionary socialist organisation is usually just the first step. Most of us don't emerge as fully rounded socialists. I mean, even when we do, we're always learning and developing and sometimes making mistakes and so on. But crucially, we want to be enthusiastic. I think every comrade is incredibly enthusiastic about everybody new that joins us. But we want to take people really seriously, and that means spending the time to discuss with people, involve them, talk through ideas, meet them for a coffee, encourage them on what they're reading and so on, to develop us as everybody, every member is a round of revolutionary socialists. Now, nobody should make any mistake here. The SWP is not simply about ideas. Our vision of a revolutionary socialist party, very much actually in the tradition of Lenin and the Bolsheviks here, is of what we sometimes might call an interventionist party. In other words, a party that, whilst it does make propaganda, promote ideas. You think our meetings, Socialist Worker, the ISJ, it's incredibly important. But we also try to translate those ideas into acting on the world outside of us, of engaging, shaping, where possible, initiating movements, struggles, and so on, sometimes taking the form of what we call a united front. That's where the SWP works with other forces that perhaps aren't revolutionary socialist. In fact, Labour Party, when it was Jeremy Corbyn in the leadership of the Labour Party, it might be local councillors, it might be the left of the Labour Party, different trade union movements, different anti-racist organisations, refugee, a whole climate movement, and so on, in those common struggles, in order to pursue more effectively the class struggle in its multivarious forms. One area of that is the ongoing climate campaigns. That's one key area. A second, thanks, Wendy, I'm going to take 2 more minutes if that's okay. The second is addressing the racist offensive that we're seeing, particularly around the Borders and Nationality Bill and the attempt to stop refugees landing on the UK coast and drowning people in the channel. I mean, it's pernicious racism. We have to respond to it. And that means there is a very key date in everyone's diary, which is March the 19th, the Stand Up to Racism demonstration in London on UN Anti-Racism Day. This can't be approached, and we've done this for a number of years, it can't be approached in a routine way. What it is about is, can we give anti-racists more confidence to push the Tories' racist offensive back? And that means it needs to be as big as possible. And that means in East Anglia, we have to think, how do we get the maximum number of people engaged and building that demonstration and coming down to London with us? And that, I think, means that we need to talk to other people in Stand Up to Racism. But I think if this isn't already underway, we need a planning meeting, not just with the usual suspects, but we need to think about everybody we'd like to invite to get involved in this, saying, help us push back the racist offensive, help us build this demonstration. We should probably be thinking about a public meeting, public Stand Up to Racism meeting to mobilise for March the 19th, late February, early March. And we need to think about putting on transport. And one of the things that tends to mean is raising money, and here particularly asking trade union branches to make a donation, as well as to support the demonstration, bring their banners and bring a contingent. That's quite a lot of things. And no doubt there's more, and including developments locally that I may not know about and different campaigns and stuff. That puts a premium on good organisation in the SWP, a branch committee that meets every week that can discuss some plans in a bit more detail, think about how it involves comrades in what we're doing, discusses with the wider branch, avoid clashes in the diary. Like I said, this is by no means a small thing. But look, if we get all of this right, there is a possibility for a strengthened Socialist Workers' Party that has a greater weight and influence for revolutionary socialist ideas inside the left, on the campuses and in the working class movement, that can continue to try to pursue that class struggle even more effectively and build a real pole of attraction. Okay, that's it. Thanks, Wendy. The debates about whether Jeremy Corbyn will set up a new party. I mean, I'm sure Ian has probably heard these arguments. I'm sure it's an ongoing discussion. I mean, I think if the only real option for the left is the Labour Party, we're in trouble. I think that's a very bleak prospect, because I think whilst there's always been a debate on the left about whether the Labour Party could be a vehicle for the left, for the socialist project, for socialism itself, that wasn't an abstract thing. That was put to the test under the most left-wing leader the party's arguably ever seen, with a huge surge of enthusiastic people joining Labour or rediscovering their socialist energy, coming in behind Corbyn. And if it didn't work then, and it's a defeated project because of the internal nature of Labourism, I don't see it ever happening. And I think that, so therefore I think there should, Corbyn should leave, should set up a new party. And I'm sceptical. I think that a lot of these briefings are possibly designed to try to put pressure on Starmer to readmit Corbyn. I don't think that will work. I don't really see that it would put Starmer under that much pressure. I think he'd pretty quite like it if Corbyn went, because it will reaffirm his whole attempt to demonstrate to the ruling class, we're respectable, we're responsible, we've broken with the left, and that would be a symbol of it. That may push Corbyn into standing as an independent. But he should do more than that. He should launch a new party. And the Labour left, I'm thinking particularly here of the best of the MPs and the sort of figureheads and so on, and think of the influence they can have. They shouldn't leave Corbyn to fight alone, I think is what we should say. But I suspect, as I think Keith and others indicate, that they probably won't leave, because they make a hard-headed calculation in purely electoral terms that it wouldn't do that well. Maybe Corbyn could get re-elected, but I think when people imagine Corbyn sets up a new party, all the unions come in behind it, millions of people vote for it, and it just eclipses. Labour Party has deep roots in society, and the argument Labour will put to motivate people who aren't that enthusiastic about Starmer, understandably, will be, well, if you want the Tories out, you've got to vote for us. No one else can form a government. And so it'd be a hard road. And I think Keith and others are right. I think the great danger, the likelihood, the probability of any new party, if it was to emerge around Corbyn, will still primarily have an electoral focus, because of that underlying assumption that that political power lies in Parliament, that's how you get social change, and that it is a false perspective. That's not where power lies. Our power doesn't lie in government, which would be a prisoner of capitalist institutions and the capitalist big business and the banking system and so on. Our power lies in the confidence and activity and strength of our class. That's when we've won the biggest gains, which is why the biggest leap in wages was in the early 70s with a Tory government, because the working class movement was at one of its most militant. How we won the vote, how we won women's suffrage, all of these questions. It's about struggle from below. And I think, when you look at the Peace and Justice project, which I think a lot of people have high hopes of, I think it's been incredibly passive. And I have to tell you, what I think the Peace and Justice campaign has essentially done is gathered lots of emails. It hasn't done anything with them. And I think that the danger is that any new project would be electoral. It would be exciting. It would be a big development. I'm sure we'd be talking about it if it did happen in much more detail. And it would possibly provide a further opportunity for more debates amongst socialists to work together and argue about the way forward. That doesn't necessarily mean that the SWP would join it or anything like this. It's all very speculative. But our argument would be we need to do more than break with Labour. That's a crucial first step. But we have to break with the whole tradition of Labourism that essentially says the key thing is voting. Our argument is that's utterly secondary. It's not relevant, but it's utterly secondary. The key is, can we get more struggle? Can we get more working class confidence? Can we get more organisation and so on? And that is essentially what we're trying to talk about tonight and coming out of the SWP conference, isn't it? How we grapple with that big question. So just a couple of things to end. Firstly, March the 19th. I think Kevin's point is right. I think we all have to challenge ourselves and say, this is urgent, this is serious, and we have to build it with a very sustained way in thinking about the transport to London. The one thing I will say is I think there are huge numbers of people that do want to see resistance to the racist offensive. We are not alone. And probably our biggest danger is not thinking big enough and just thinking, well, there's a few of us against racism. No. Millions of people are. There was a fascinating article actually in The Guardian that I noticed over Christmas by David Olsuga, who is the guy, who was the expert. He's a professor. He was the expert witness for the Colston Four about Edward Colston and the merchant ventures in Bristol's, legacy of slavery and so on. He had an article that said, you know what, the Tories aren't having it sort of their own way. They had a go at the England football team overtaking the knee, and they lost that argument. By the end, they were all buying England shirts to try and identify the success of the team. Farage has a go at the Royal, the National Lifeboat Institute for picking up stranded refugees, saving their lives. It's disgusting. And what do you get? You get a huge surge of donations to the RNLI. The Tories tried to have a go at the National Trust for being woke because they had a discussion about, providing more context to the history of slavery that's often provided the funds for the various monuments to look after. And, when it came to this vote, there was a challenge to the, supposedly politically correct leadership, and it was seen off, And again, I think we saw that reflected in Colston. So probably our biggest danger is we don't think broad enough, and we have to challenge ourselves on that. Just on, look, Johnson's in trouble. I don't want to see the knife just wielded by backbenchers. I want to see revolt on the street. And Tim's absolutely right. Tiffany's absolutely right. Getting rid of Johnson isn't enough, but it's a first step. The point is kick Johnson out, keep kicking, particularly around, trying to kick Johnson out, give people more confidence to fight over the whole question of the accelerating cost of living crisis. I mean, if we saw strikes in the NHS, I think the Tories themselves would be in deep trouble, not just Johnson. So we need more of this kind of resistance. But Saturday could be a first. What I think really is we should either try to get a demo, or if that's just not possible, it's too short notice and stuff. I mean, I certainly think it's a real opportunity this weekend for a really big, lively, angry socialist worker campaign stall. I think lots of people are disgusted by what the Tories were doing while so many people were dying and obeying these rules. And it's one law for them and one law for us. And so I think that's quite a feeling about the Tories, frankly, about the establishment, when lots of people making connections with the way what Prince Andrew's got away with and the corruption, and maybe there'll be a reckoning for him. So there's a feeling in society that, I mean, it was there before, but it has sharpened in the last few months and frankly in the last few days. So let's really get on the front foot and say, express that anger and say we need a radical alternative. Lastly, just on students, in many ways the most important thing. I really agreed with the points that Pete was making. I mean, I think it's a very interesting and significant development, the way that so many students are now also working. The SWP isn't only interested in recruiting students. We're recruiting, and we want to recruit young workers. I mean, we recruited a young comrade, 24, who works at the Rolls-Royce plant in Bristol, who's now a member of our union committee of SWP members in Unite. And we have a layer of young workers who've joined us in the National Education Union, so we want more of them. But why you're putting a particular emphasis on students is the fact there's a number of realities, isn't there? First of all, universities are kind of factories ideas that are supposed to transmit the ruling class's idea to a future generation. And therefore the clash with the reality of the world, the ideological crisis that the ruling class ideas don't fit and don't explain, you see reflected in polls that people say socialism is more popular than capitalism amongst them. That is sharpest where people are having to stuff down their throat. Secondly, unlike a workplace, a young worker may work in a supermarket, and that may well provide opportunities to talk to them, especially if we have another comrade in that workplace and meet people on protests and things. But you can't hold a Swiss meeting in it. It's much more open to and accessible around campuses, and people have a little bit of time to discuss and debate and argue and clarify their ideas for all the reasons that Pete was outlining. So there's an opportunity to access students and connect with these debates, and we can see that there's a radicalization happening. And if we're able to recruit a new generation of students into the SWP, and probably not all, but quite a few of us joined while we're students, I certainly did, but they will also be in workplaces. They will go into workplaces full time, probably in the future, when they graduate. They can be future active trade unionists and so on. And second, if you have a branch with more students, it's quite attractive to young workers. And how do existing and older trade union activists in the SWP relate to young workers? I think that, first of all, we have to be, as trade unionists, the most active fighters. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Wendy. That will attract people, not just slogans, but with a serious strategy and record of delivering and building in the unions and offering an alternative. That will attract people to us. But it's also by taking up wider political issues and not just seeing the unions as about paying conditions and so on, important though that is, but also taking up questions of climate change, anti-racism, ideological questions, trans rights, being political trade unionists who are tribunes of the oppressed. That can also attract a new layer of young workers towards us. So, it's multifaceted, but where can we make the sharpest breakthrough to win a new generation that can re-energize our organisation amongst students. And it's, I think, just finally, Tim is right. It's a two-way process. We have to listen to students, listen to anyone that's around us, listen to what they're saying, their arguments and discussions and ideas, and discuss with people in a serious and indeed organised way. But they will raise big questions about what's happening in society and how to understand it. And that can be a challenge to us to raise to the level of the questions that people, and that means we need to be taking ideas seriously and reading and so on. We need to test ourselves. But if we can do these things, and I'm confident we can, it's quite clear that there is as I said, an opportunity for the SWP to win a new generation around it. Thanks, Wendy.